Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next live early career blueprint series. I just want to let you know that will be recording this presentation, but then we'll shut it off the recording at the end during the Q&A so that we can have an open and honest discussion. My name is Dr. Ami Hampole. I come from Advocate Christ Medical Center and Advocate Hope Children's Hospital in Oak Lawn, Illinois, where I practice musculoskeletal, electrodiagnostic, and acute inpatient rehabilitation medicine, and am the lead physician for the Skating Council of Illinois. The Early Career Blueprint series was started approximately a year ago by Dr. Caitlyn Mooney and Dr. Lauren Rudolph and hosted by the Women in Leadership Leads. The goal of this series is to help fill a large gap of knowledge in career navigation and career development, especially pertaining to women physicians in sports medicine, who are, as we know, a minority in the field. So I lost myself. Oh, here. Okay. I hope you can still hear me. Yeah, so all genders are welcome to attend this series because we speak about hot topics that pertain to everyone and could be useful to everyone too. Previous topics that we've spoken about include network building, finding sports medicine jobs, promoting diversity while dealing with gender bias in the field, and graceful self-promotion. For those of you who cannot join us live, you can catch this and other recordings on the AMSSM YouTube channel. Today, we will be speaking about mastering your job, residency, or fellowship interviews. We realize that interviewing is not always as straightforward as it's supposed to be. Nonetheless, it is a crucial step in the process of landing your dream job and our training program. We hope this talk will give you everything you need to sail through your next interview. Our special guest today is Dr. Salvador Portugal. Dr. Portugal is an assistant professor of rehabilitation medicine at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and he serves as the director of the Sports Medicine Fellowship Program within the Rusk Department of the Rehabilitation Medicine. He is the immediate past president of the New York Society of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation and the head team physician of the St. Joseph University Brooklyn Athletic Program. Next, I will introduce one of my fellow co-hosts today, Dr. Lauren Poindexter. She is a board-certified physiatrist and sports medicine physician practicing in Arkansas. She is an academic practice at the University of Arkansas and Arkansas Children's Hospital. Dr. Poindexter also serves as a team physician for the Arkansas Razorback Athletics and provides medical coverage at local races sanctioned by the USA Cycling, USA Triathlon, and Union Cyclists International. Finally, Dr. Caitlyn Mooney is also co-hosting with us today. She is the professor of orthopedics at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She is a medical educator at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and the team physician for the Vanderbilt University Dance and Cheer. So we're excited to have all of you on here today with us. And please do introduce yourself in the chat box because we do want to know who you are and where you come from. So if you don't mind putting your name, where you're from, or any other information about your background in the chat box, we would love to hear from you. And then also, if you have any questions throughout this talk, please do include in the chat box. We will address them at the end. So we're going to go through this presentation real quick, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end where we can grill our guest speaker, Dr. Portugal, as well as any of us as well. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Amy. That was great. Just want clarification. I'm assistant professor.
Sorry.
I might have,
You seem like a professor. Sorry.
just in case anybody comes to me from Vanderbilt. But I could have accidentally typed that incorrectly as well. So this topic today, what was that?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Nuts and bolts of interviewing and pro tips for presenting your best self. I have had the opportunity to do a lot of interviewing because I've had a few jobs since fellowship, and then so I've had a lot of practice, so I really enjoyed putting this together all in one presentation just to help some other people with the interview process. I do think this would also be good for fellowship and residency interviews, although I do think there's some key differences for that process that I'll talk a little bit about. So sorry, I have a little bit of a cough. For an overview, we'll go through program research, CV and cover letter in brief, interviewing behavior, common questions, dealing with controversial questions, and then some post-interview considerations. So the most important thing to consider is that you really need to prepare yourself for the interview day. I know a lot of times the surgeons I work with say that 90% of a surgery is preparing for it. I think that's also a huge percentage of going on an interview. You want to first understand what you want. I think this is a little bit less focused on for residency and fellowship interviews, because you do have to apply to a large number of programs sometimes to match. But for your first job, you really want to understand what you want in terms of location, setting, what your scope of practice is. Are you going to be doing, for example, for me, am I going to be doing gen peds urgent care and sports medicine? Are you going to do PM&R and sports medicine? Are you going to do mostly ER and then do a little bit of sports medicine? So what would you be happy with, and what sort of patient population does the location that you're interviewing for have? Before you apply to jobs, it's really important to know what you want before you start looking. So understanding what you want out of the next chapter of your life. The goal for a successful job and interview would be that you have a good fit. And remember that you're interviewing your prospective employer as well. So remember to ask those important questions to make sure that this is a good fit and that this is someplace that you want to go to. This also is important to make sure that you are aware of anything that might sway whether you decide to go there or not. So asking people who have previously left the program, really understanding that you also have power in this process, and that your job, while you do want to sell yourself, they should also be trying to sell you on that practice. But at the same time, you have to be doing your own due diligence to make sure that it's a good fit. I think on the flip side, for residency and fellowship, just because of the process of the match, a lot of times you're not going to ask sometimes those most critical questions, because you really do need to match. So do you think there's a little bit of a different dynamic there? So again, preparation is most important. Google is your friend that can get you so much information for your research on a program, on people, etc. So things that you want to research before you go on your interview. So you want to know specifics about the program. If it's residency or fellowship, I guess specifically fellowship, do they match ER residents? Do they match PM&R residents? If they don't, then probably not a place that you want to apply to. Or if they will technically accept that, but they've never actually accepted a resident out of that specialty, that's also useful to know. Also, when you look at a program on the internet, it allows you to ask appropriate questions to gauge whether it will really be a good fit for you. The more you know about the program, the more you can really critically think about what sort of questions you want to ask while you're there. And then it also shows that you're interested in that you did your homework. You want to also research your interviewers. So a lot of times when you go on an interview, you get a list of the people beforehand. So having an idea of, is this an orthopedic surgeon I'm interviewing with? Is it a sports medicine doctor? Is it even the practice managers are helpful to know who they are, so that you have an understanding of who you're talking to, who you want to ask those different questions to, as well as even sometimes just getting an understanding of who they are and what they are interested in can be helpful. And then you also probably want to research the community. What's the cost of living? What about schools? Do they have jobs for your partner? All sorts of lifestyle issues as well. So doing your homework is the most important part of the interview process. I usually try to write notes or download bios on my iPad so that I could look over them on my plane ride while I was going somewhere. So there's all sorts of tools you can do for that. Or if you carry one of those leather interview portfolios, you can always write down the people, maybe like one line about each person so that you remember it. Because sometimes especially for those 1.5 day, 2 day interviews, it can be hard to keep everybody straight. Logistics. Another important thing is that you have all your information at your fingertips, so that you know who you're contacting if something goes wrong. Like, who is that person who set up your flight information. So for residency and fellowship interviews, you're probably setting these things up yourself, but when you're interviewing for your first faculty or attending job, a lot of times there's someone who is coordinating that for you. So it might be their one of their administrators. So you want to have that person's information in case something goes wrong, because they're probably the person who set up your drive, the person who's driving you from the airport and all those sorts of things. If you're driving yourself, you want to make sure that you have looked at the map and you considered rush hour traffic, the weather, where you're going to park, how long it will take you to walk from where you're parking, those sorts of things to make sure that you're on time, and make sure you have a campus map available so that you're not wandering around, and know the where, when, and how you're getting from place to place. Always important to pack appropriate clothes and preferably have that in a carry-on in case anything gets lost. Make sure you have any clothes for both the interview itself as well as, for example, a dinner if that's on the schedule. So a brief thing to remember to bring with you and prepare for is your CV, which stands for like in Latin, course of life. So this is that detailed document highlighting all your academic and professional life. You should make sure that before you go on your interview, you have updated it, add anything that you hadn't had on it before, including planned or in process projects. Bring that copy of your CV with you just so that you could give it to somebody if they didn't have one for you. And also, even though you gave this to everybody, and even though it was probably emailed to everybody, just assume that your interviewer hasn't read it recently. You know, they could have read it a while ago. They might not have even read it. So just remember, read it yourself the night before your interview, and think of, what do I want to highlight? What does this program want? So especially if you do a good amount of research, you might say, I think or maybe from the job listing, you might say, I think what they're looking for is this. So you're going to highlight those things on your CV, and then make sure that you discuss that on the interview day. So I usually looked at my CV the night before. I even had a copy that I would circle myself and really try to figure out what I was trying to highlight about myself that day based on that individual program. And then that's what I would focus on. So also, cover letters are something that often goes with your application, but that also should be tailored to each individual program based on the listing, what you think they want. And generally, it's considered to be probably about 3 paragraphs, kind of bridging your past, present, and what you think you could do with them in the future. I do think it's kind of this tweet, I guess, is pretty funny, that cover letters are so weird. Like, bro, why do I need to write you some fan fiction about working for you? Because you're kind of trying to think about, what does this institution want me to do? And why do I think it would be a great fit? And you're kind of making an imaginary thing. Like, I think I would be a great fit because I can do this for your institution that also goes with what your plans to do X, Y, or Z, which you might have found on their website or in their job listing. But that's kind of what you want to do. You want to have a specific cover letter for each institution, each job that you're applying to, based on what you think you can offer that program. You're gonna want to have a strong opening, be really enthusiastic about it, say why you're interested, what you bring to the table, what is your passion, what makes you interesting, and why you would be an asset to them. This is kind of like your brand for them. This is your spin. This is who you are to them. Use active verbs. Make sure to be succinct. Goal would be really 1 page, and then make sure you grammar check it. So again, read these before the interview. Make sure you're up to date on exactly what you said, because you probably sent this a while ago. Highlight what you want for that specific job. And again, just don't assume anyone recently read it. And you can always bring copies of those things with you. And then I just listed some resources for cover letters and CVs. I use that going over my CV and my cover letter to prepare like what I think I'm going to say at the interview. We've already done a couple talks where we talk about an elevator pitch, which would be probably about a 3-sentence short talk about any specific topic about yourself, whether it's your goals, your interests, like a specific project. So you want something succinct that is kind of how you want them to know who you are in 3 short sentences. Of course, for an interview, you don't have to do it in 3 sentences, but the same idea exists in that prepare a statement that you're going to be portraying at this interview. And you probably will have to say it multiple times to multiple people. Use buzzwords that you saw in the listing or goals of the division or department. It's always nice to kind of tie in your goals to what their goals are, as well. I found this actually to be really helpful. If I knew someone who already worked at the program that I was applying to, sometimes they can help you out and say, I did have somebody say, we really like actually that I'm doing these sorts of talks on career development. Maybe you should include that when you talk to our department. And when I was most recently interviewing, and I did find that was interesting because that's somebody in the institution saying it as if they might have already talked about it. But even if someone doesn't come up to you and say that what would make you a good fit for the department, you can always ask people that you know. And then a quick discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion. I think if it's important, especially if this is critical to you, to look at the other people in the division, department, or institution. You can usually see on the website. Think of how you will fit in there, and will you be the only blank? And then consider, are you okay with that? If you really want to be in a certain area, your goal is to be a certain team doctor, you might be okay with that. But if diversity, equity, and inclusion is just really important for you, that a program where everybody looks exactly the same and not necessarily like you, or even if they just don't look the same, but and they do look like you, but that's not something that you want, you might that might not be the best fit for a job. You can always ask about an institution or program's goals and perspectives regarding diversity, equity, inclusion as well, if that is important and you want to make sure that you're going somewhere that aligns with your goals, you're in with that, or your ideals. I think it's always fair. You want to make sure that you have the best fit. And if you ask some questions and you're not getting what you want, that might not be the best place for you. And now you have that important information when you're leaving and trying to make decisions about a job. So now I'm going to hand this off to Lauren.
You're on mute.
Perfect. So Caitlyn's going to go back to where we were at. So behavior and conduct. So, it's so interesting. Lots of people will give you recommendations like, oh, just be yourself and whatever. But when it comes time for an interview, you want your personality to shine, yes, but you also need to be controlled and professional at the same time. So it's always better to dress up than dress down, right? So consider that you are trying to present the best version of yourself. If you are going for an interview that may last a couple hours, do make sure you have snacks with you. Make sure you bring water with you. Don't expect that the interviewer is going to provide you with meals unless it was explicitly explained so. If you do have to travel, consider keeping all of your clothes in a carry-on, so that you don't. I did leave a suitcase when I was interviewing for medical school. And you want to be genuine about your interests, about your background, about your CV, and do, even if it is a virtual interview, do your best to try to share your personality and your enthusiasm about the program with those who work there. Okay. And not just the boss, but everybody in that facility. So if you come in and, for example, you're rude to security or rude to the people that sit at the front desk, I can guarantee you that information is going to travel up the pipeline. Okay. So be on your best behavior, be thoughtful, and do be sincere. Okay. being or coming off as being uninterested is going to be, in theory, kind of a fatal flaw, right? So we have all on this panel, we have all conducted a number of interviews, and we can tell within a couple seconds just how engaged or invested somebody is in your program. So you don't have to stare them dead in the eye for 100% of the time, but do make sure that you are engaged. And you really do, when we talk about preparation, I know Dr. Mooney said this repeatedly, but preparation really is key. It's obvious if you don't know who you're speaking with, okay? And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I can't control the PowerPoint, so I'm going to rely on Dr. Mooney to do so. Thank you. So make a list of questions that you want to ask. And again, this is specific for your level of training. So if you are going to be applying to fellowship, you are not necessarily going to ask all of these questions. If you are applying for an attending position, you're not necessarily going to ask all these positions or all these questions, excuse me. So consider, if you're interviewing for an attending type position, what, practically speaking, what does my day-to-day schedule look like? What staff are present to assist? Do I have control over how my template is arranged? Do I get to decide how many minutes long each of my new patient appointments are and how long the follow-up visits are? Okay. We are in sports medicine, and every different organization can take a unique approach to how they compensate for sports coverage. So this is not something you have to worry about when you're a resident, typically not something you worry about as a fellow, but when you're in an attending, you need to know, am I expected to be away from my family for 15 hours a week, covering training room, covering local and remote games? Am I going to be compensated? Do I have to pay for my own travel? Do I have to pay for my own supplies? Okay, so lots of questions with regards to sports coverage. So getting a good understanding of to what your reimbursement looks like is going to be important. Fellowships, not so much, but unique questions that you want to ask when you are applying for fellowships is, what programs, what practice environments have your prior fellows gone on to work in, right? So if you are dead set on, I am going to be an academic emergency medicine, sports medicine physician, I don't want to do any emergency medicine, I don't want to work in the ER, I only want to do clinic sports medicine, you want to ask that question, because if every single fellow graduate they've ever had goes on to work primarily in emergency departments, that may influence how highly you rank that program. So when Dr. Mooney talked about what is it that you want, you need to ask questions that will help you determine, is this program going to fit me, and am I going to fit this program? Okay. Understanding whether or not that program or that position is going to reimburse you or give you time for research, for academic writing, for participation in educational activities. Are there fellows around, or residents around, or med students around that you are going to be able to teach? Do you even want to teach? If you don't want to teach, you don't want to have that responsibility of teaching these learners throughout the day. Okay, so make sure you and your interviewer get a good feel for one another, and that you both have clarifying questions. So clarifying questions are, if you didn't completely understand what something was asked of you, or you didn't get a full answer of what you're looking for, then ask clarifying questions. Okay. And you're allowed to write things down as you're talking. You don't have to try to memorize everything all at once. Dr. Portugal here can tell you, when I interviewed for fellowship at his institution, I'm pretty sure I was like writing furiously, and I probably went home with a small notebook of information. So please feel free to document as needed. And then let's go to the next page. Thank you. So questions you want to be prepared for. I know that this is in really small writing, but there is a long, long list of wonderful online resources that you can search for. We've provided that list at the end of this presentation. So there's wonderful organizations that can give you a more detailed list of questions. But some things that I commonly ask of interviewees is, tell me a situation in which you felt uniquely challenged, and how did you respond? What did you learn? How did you grow from that? Okay, so I want to hear a specific situation. You don't have to have handled it perfectly, but I want to know how you changed because of it. Other questions people might ask you: what is your ideal patient population? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Okay, if you had everything you ever wanted, what does your career look like in 10 years? Right? So they're not asking what's practical a year from now, but they're asking, where do you want to go? Because they want to know, an employer wants to know, how can we help you get there? And are we the right people to assist you on that journey? All right. Other questions specifically in the sports medicine world, I will ask specifically, tell me about a time when either you were in the clinic or on the sideline and you had a patient scenario that required a team approach. So what was the situation and who did you get involved to help that patient? I want to know if the candidate is able to recognize who are their allies, right? I want them to understand, what is the value of an athletic trainer? What is the role of an orthopedic surgeon? What is the role of a physical therapist? And how do we work together? Because sports medicine is a team sport, right? So these interviewers are going to want to hear from you specific examples, right? So stay succinct, stay on topic, don't go off course, but illustrate, right? And you can be sincere and you can say, you know what, I don't like how I handled it at the time. And so I talked to my program director and said, hey, listen, I had a hard time with this. How can I do better next time? Because that reflection and that insight goes a long way. Other questions that interviewers might ask you: why our program? Why our institution? Why do you want to be here? And giving specifics is going to go a long way in indicating that you thought about this, right? And so yes, in the back of all of our minds, we're thinking to ourselves, just hire us already. Like, we need a paycheck, please, right? So we get that, we understand that. But recognizing, hey, when I interviewed in New York City and my interviewers said, you're from Arkansas, what relationship do you have at all to New York City? I was honest, right? And I said, listen, you could plot me down in the middle of anywhere in America. Football fields are 100 yards long. I've lived in all continental time zones of the United States, and my best friend lives in New York City. So, things worked out great, but be specific, right? So if you're not an obvious geographical candidate, explain what your connections are to that region. Also, strengths and weaknesses, right? So if someone asks you, what's your weakness? I could tell you, for example, I have a habit of taking on too much, and how I learned. Dr. Mooney, the rest of us are all like, yes, we all do the same thing. That's why we're here. But learning how to follow that up with, this has typically been one of my weaknesses, and here are specific ways I've addressed that. So we want to hear how you're growing and how you're maturing over time. And also, if we're your boss or we're your attending, how can we help you? Okay, let's go to the next page. Thank you. So there's some things out there called bad or illegal questions. And so these types of interview questions are questions that should not be utilized by an interviewer, okay? Because these are concepts that should not be involved in whether or not somebody hires you. So if you are part of a protected class, for example, I'm a minority in some environments as a female. So if I'm looking to interview for, a environment in which it is predominantly men and there are no females on staff, I need to be sensitive to some of these questions that may be delivered in my direction. And most importantly, as an interviewee, I want to know, why is that information being asked of me? Okay. What is it that they're trying to get to? Right. So is it that they want to know if I'm interested in getting pregnant in the next couple of years because that influences their hiring decision? Or is it that like their wife just had a baby and it's been really stressful? Like, you want to ask clarifying questions. And I have been asked questions like this in interviews. So do consider how you are going to respond to these types of questions. Okay. And that goes back to Dr. Mooney's slide earlier about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you don't feel like you fit in to the professional milieu, does that concern you? Do you want to ask more clarifying questions in your interview? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So I love this. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And as I mentioned, I've had some pretty challenging questions asked of me. In one interview, I was asked, what is my age and am I married? The interviewer at the top of their page, very clearly, the interviewer wrote my age. She wrote unmarried and triple underlined it on the top of my thing. So as an interviewee, right, what is my responsibility in that moment? It was entirely inappropriate, but I have control over my own response. So how am I going to respond? And so I asked, tell me what the relevance is to that. If you're concerned that I am single or married or of a certain age group, let me reassure you about my commitment to this profession. And so recognizing that some of these questions may come your way is important to think through ahead of time. You want to role play in your head. How would I respond if this happened? How do I keep my cool? How do I ask the interviewer, can you help me better understand what you mean by that question? Or with regards to the pregnancy question, let me understand this correctly. Did you ask me if I plan to become pregnant during my fellowship year? Help me understand how that impacts my candidacy for your position. And just reflecting that information back to the interviewer may help them recognize that that was not the right way to ask that type of question, or maybe they should not be asking that type of question whatsoever. Okay. In the extreme scenario, if you feel that you cannot continue on with that interview, that's understandable. I would also recommend in that case contacting anybody in that department at that institution to let them know about your situation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so additional tips. If you have not already gone onto all of your social media, please go into social media, check to see what's public, check to see what's private. Do consider that information that you posted 15 years ago from high school may very well follow you into your medical school, residency, and fellowship journeys, even into your attending life. So, our social media presence can be cultivated to some degree, but you really want to make sure that what you are presenting to your interviewers is consistent with just who you are. Okay. And also to your patients, right? Are you a safe bet for somebody to hire you? Networking also is social currency. So the fact that y'all are on tonight is fantastic. Let me remind you, if you haven't already, if you've joined us late, please plug into the chat where you're tuning in from and what role you are, or excuse me, what level you are in training, because we'd really like to interact with you. So making it to the national annual meetings is fantastic for AMSSM if you're able to. Any other way that you can network or just show a sincere investment in this career with others who may be at or above your level of training is going to go a long way. Also consider mock interviews with attendings or anybody in your immediate vicinity who knows you and who can help give you direct feedback on how you're presenting yourself. Also consider that contract negotiation starts immediately. As I mentioned before, if you are unpleasant to security, unpleasant to the front office staff, that information is going to get back to the boss, right? And I don't mean that as a threat, but I mean that as this is a really important opportunity for you to show your best self, and everybody needs to know that you're fantastic. Okay, so make sure that you show that side of yourself to everybody. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so post-interview considerations. I cannot tell you how few thank you letters I get. Very, very, very few. Dr. Portugal, I don't know if you remember the thank you letter I sent you, but I did electronic thank you letters for every single one of my interviewers, because if y'all don't already realize, we take time out of clinic or our weekends to interview. So if we're not seeing patients, we're not gathering revenue for our organization. So it's exhausting for us too to interview you. So, just a little thank you can go a long way. Okay. It doesn't have to be exhaustive. But do please just convey your thanks for taking the time out of our day so that we can get to know you better. Remember, that interview is, who do I want to work with? Are you thoughtful? Are you considerate? Do you give insightful answers? Do we feel like we could, hang out during lunch and talk about what our plans are for the upcoming weekend? So we want to get to know you as an individual, and we really do like to hear thanks. Okay. You don't have to write thank you letters. You don't have to mail them. There's some really great electronic versions online. All right. And I think we're almost done. Caitlin, what have we got out? What have we got out going on? Yep. So how to decline a job offer. Be tactful, be prompt. Remember, just because you're declining this offer right now doesn't mean this wouldn't be a good fit for you in the future. Right? Sports medicine is a really small field, and we all run into each other all of the time, especially at the annual meetings. So it's kind of like hey, I'm sorry I can't join you right now. Maybe another time. You just don't know what the future is going to bring. Okay. And then last but not least, got it. So we will give another lecture in the future on contract negotiation. And we've actually got another lecture coming up next month to talk about career mentoring and career coaching. So I hope you stick with us. And last but not least, we've got some wonderful slides, tons of resources. Obviously, I know that you cannot click on the screen and be linked to these, but please do check out our Early Career Blueprint series on YouTube. AAFP, the New England Journal of Medicine has a career center, and Harvard Business Review is one of my favorites for getting information about these topics. So what we're going to do is we are going to open this up to Q&A. I'm going to start off with some quick questions for Dr. Sal Portugal. So he is our expert panelist today. And I'd like to add, Dr. Portugal has worked in a number of different environments. So private practice, academic, etc. He's interviewed so many people. He not only has his Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine degree, but he also has his MBA. So if there's anybody who can speak intelligently on this topic, it's definitely Dr. Portugal. So I'm going to ask him, what are some big faux pas that you have seen with interviewees today? What sticks out in your mind?
Interviewing for the wrong job. It sounds silly, but so we'll just start off with that one, right? So do dogs burp? I love that slide. Anyhow, it doesn't happen too often, but just right off the bat, there have been applicants for residency that submitted their personal statements applying for general surgery when obviously they were applying for PM&R. I don't know how they got through to the stage of interviewing, but that was later discussed. But I'll start with that one. Um, but just to kind of add to what Dr. Mooney, yourself have presented, I do think one of the key things is understanding what you're applying for. And I know that sounds common sense, but what is the position? Um, what do you know about the individual program or institution is extremely key. You don't necessarily have to fit the exact description that you see online. I think that in some ways can be hurtful. While I think it's good to understand, for example, our fellowship program has an interventional spine component. Um, Essentially, every single fellow that or applicant that applies says that they're interested in interventional spine. However, a very small percentage of them have um, let's say a publication or any kind of experience to speak to because they haven't had their spine rotation at that point in time. So just be mindful of what you're applying for, and then speak to your own personal experiences.
Wonderful. Dr. Portugal, I've got another question for you.
Go for it.
Yep, absolutely. So when interviewees, when candidates apply for the fellowship program, they have to enter all of their information into that standard ERAS application, and then they also submit a separate CV. So it takes a lot of time. When you're looking at that ERAS application or you're looking at that CV, what types of things do you want to see on that CV as a sports medicine fellowship program director?
Sure. So before I go into speaking about fellowship applications, I will say that the interview process for a specific position will be very different, and how I'm evaluating a CV will be very different. Whether it's a faculty position within my division or evaluating or reviewing a proper fit for a researcher within our department, resident applicant, like a medical student applying for a residency program, or a fellowship applicant. However, what I'm going to be describing, I have a feeling is very similar across what probably most fellowship program directors are doing. It's number one, assessing is what that fellowship applicant looking for, can we offer that at our program, right? So while they may check all the boxes, right, in terms of research, sideline coverage experiences, and whatnot, in their personal statement, they may be looking for a very specific experience my fellowship program may not be able to offer them, right? So that I think that's the first thing that I'm looking at. I imagine a lot of program directors are looking for that. However, there are some fellowship programs I'm sure that are more research focused and seeing do they have the research experience to be able to contribute in the way that we expect our fellows to contribute in terms of research, and similarly in terms of sideline coverage, are they familiar with the training room? Are they familiar with the mass event coverage that we expect them to cover right off the bat? So I'll stop there.
All right, so we have a couple great questions in the chat, and I'm really glad that we're being honest, because this is a really great place to discuss, like, what do I do if I'm like maybe thinking about getting pregnant during fellowship, or if it happens, how do I ask about pregnancy or maternity leave? I think that's a really fascinating concept. I would like to turn this over to Dr. Portugal, and he is going to laugh that I gave him this topic. But my gut instinct says, if you ask that if I, like, for example, if I were to ask that, that may indicate to the program director, oh gosh, we might not have this fellow present for some length of time, and that could be difficult. What are some things that you would want that candidate to consider? Sal.
So looking at the question specifically, would it be appropriate or hurtful for us in any way to ask how a program may accommodate if a female fellow gets pregnant during fellowship? I think it would be totally appropriate for you to ask that if that's part of your life plan. I think it is very common in our program. Within our residency program, we've had female residents that have gone through that, had babies and graduated on time. How that applies in terms of the one-year fellowship, the fellowship program should have in place. I know ACGME, their GME department will make recommendations regarding what accommodations can be made. And if accommodations can't be made, or definitely accommodations can be made, but what are they? What does that entail specifically? I personally, for example, would have to check with GME, but it's totally appropriate for you to ask that. While some questions may be off limits from the interviewer to ask you, if there are certain concerns that you have about a sensitive topic like this one, I think it's appropriate and everything's fair game from the interviewer perspective.
I think it's interesting because I can see certain people writing that down and that may be having a negative implication on the process. That being said, is that place the best fit for you? If people are going to do that, it probably isn't the best fit for your life, but it could negatively impact the applicant. So I do think it can be done carefully. Another great thing I think would be is finding a fellow, possibly at MSSM, who was pregnant and ask which programs have been supportive. I think it's really interesting because there's even some, unfortunately, when Andy Meyer asked me if I knew any sports medicine doctors on TikTok, I ended up going on TikTok and now watching TikTok a lot. But somebody, there's been some medical trainees who have discussed how certain programs have been very unaccommodating for pregnancy. So we know that some places are still not doing what they probably should be doing. That being said, none of those are sports medicine fellowships specifically, but I do find that it can be a complex thing to navigate as well.
I wanted to highlight there were some really insightful questions from the chat that an individual wanted us to address. Resignation explanations. So I'll throw this out to Salvador Portugal. So resignation explanations, we don't want to badmouth a former employer. To some, we still want to be upfront. But and Shilpa, no, to go ahead and take notes. We still want to be upfront, but how do we tread lightly while still being honest?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
That's a great question. It's funny because Lauren put this on me because she knows I'm brutally honest. So
yes, and you've helped. I know for a fact that you have helped others through situations like that.
Yes.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's difficult, right? So obviously, if there's if there is a legal matter in terms and you can't disclose certain details of a situation, then obviously legally you cannot do that. I think one of the things about potentially hiring someone is considering how honest they are and how authentic they are, but also how tactful they are about explaining any kind of difficult situation that they are in. And as mentioned before, is that everybody on this call will likely interact with each other, whether it's at the conference or have mutual contacts. It's a very small world. So you just have to be mindful of that. I know that's not a great explanation, but I do think that being honest, being authentic goes a long way. Then again, as mentioned here, where did it go? Bad mouthing employers or burning bridges is not the ideal way to go go about things, but I'll try to be as tactful as possible.
Something along those lines, we are all such unique individuals, and not 100% of environments are we going to feel welcome in or are going to be welcoming to us. We're not going to get along with 100% of people. So understand, I think kind of drilling down to why an environment doesn't fit helps you to understand what environment do you think you will fit into, right? So what environment are you looking for? If the current environment that you're in is not working, why is it not working? And so something you can say is, rather than saying, oh, I was at an institution and they were like way too academic and I don't want to do research, you can turn that around too, and not lie, but say, I understand that in academic environment, certain things were expected of me. I find that my passion lies more in whatever else it is, right? So maybe you're not big on research. That's fine. Find a great environment where you can be your full self and you're not asked to do research. Okay. So why something doesn't fit can also help you understand what will fit. If that makes any sense.
I think if you have a break from a previous institution, it's so easy to just say, my last job, our goals not, I'm looking for a job where my goals more align, or I'm looking for a different environment where I can do this, and this. Even like I have a really strong interest in this specific thing, and at that institution, it just didn't really align with their goals. It's so easy to say something pretty generic without bad mouthing an institution. And at the same time, I think if someone throws you a question about why you're leaving your institution, they know they're probably not going to get the full answer anyway, and that your job is really just to say, I'm really looking for a place where I can grow differently or do something different. And total transparency is not the expectation of that question. And at the same time, you can kind of then skew that to those things that you really are passionate about, that you really want to start doing, that will fit with that other place that you're going. Even saying, I really wanted to move closer to family can be really easy as well. Things like that, things totally outside of medicine, can be a really easy way to describe why you're looking for a new job, and not really bad mouth. And then I think there's nothing like having an previous experience that gives you those great things to ask about at the next interview, because you realize what you didn't ask about the first time. And so I think life is a learning experience, and you'll never think of all the specific things that you should have asked the first time. And then the other thing was, with references, usually you work with enough people that you could get a reference from somebody else, even if like one person at the institution you can't get a reference from, I would think.
Caitlyn or Dr. Mooney mentioned something very important, is that we all grow, we all evolve over time. And what our needs are and what our best fit for a work environment is when we're 30 may be radically different at 35, depending on how your life changes. And that's okay, right? Like, we know that. Rarely in today's day and age do we expect somebody to stay at the same job from the age of 25 to 60, right? So we understand that you're going to grow and you're going to evolve, and that's okay. So do be specific to some degree about what you're hoping to find. I'd like more freedom with regards to my academic time or whatever. And then you can negotiate about that with the interviewer. All right. And let's pick up. Yeah, we're going to stop the recording just shortly. I'm going to look at some of the questions above. Being firm without being offensive when asked inappropriate questions. I think we addressed that before about, like, reflect back on the interviewer. Say, I think I'm hearing you ask me this. Is that correct? Can you explain a little bit more about why that is pertinent at this time? I think that can be helpful. Sometimes when the interviewer hears what you're saying, when you reflect it back onto them, they may be like, oh, that's not what I meant. So give them the opportunity to kind of walk it back or change things. Can be really helpful.
I have a question before we shut off the recording.
Of course.
That we have and that I think would be good. But what do you do during virtual interviews? How do you learn more about the place you're potentially interested in if you're doing everything virtually? Does anyone have anything they want to add on that? My
Well,
take is, yeah, go ahead.
I'll take it. So, lucky for the few of you that are on this call that are going to get a little sneak peek, but asking the fellow questions while you're in the breakout rooms is good. It goes a long way. But mostly for you because right, the fellows are present in the room and available to answer questions. And specifically if you're for fellowship applications, that's probably the best way to get your answers or questions answered, as well as Dr. Mooney mentioned it before, is like you are interviewing the program and I actually find that to be the questions the applicant asked me, whether that's a faculty member or a resident applying for our fellowship program, the types of questions they ask me gives me more insight into what they're looking for. So obviously it goes two ways, right? If you had a question about the program, we can obviously answer for you, but also helps get a better sense of where you're trying to go in terms of your career.
So yeah, and with the virtual interviews, some of the things you can ask are, what are your favorite things to do outside of work, or what do your fellows enjoy doing? And that's really fun, right? So we can get excited about like where we get to take our dogs. That's what Caitlyn and I talk about when we're together. But ask things like that. Where do the families enjoy going? What sort of family friendly, like where are some fun places that I might take my kids, or whatever, that those can be really enlightening discussions. And as Dr. Portugal mentioned, definitely ask the fellows those things. We've had some prospective interviewees even come and visit for the weekend. Don't show up and expect your interviewer to like hold your hand and take you on like an all expenses tour of the city or wherever you're at. But if that is a serious consideration for you and this is a job that you're really, really interested in, then you're welcome to make an effort. You're welcome to travel there and see what's going on. If somebody is available to meet with you, that's great too. But that's always an option for you if you wish.
And then I have another one. What do you do when you ask someone about a program or a job and you get two completely opposite responses? So one person is like raving about the place, and then you have another person who has very negative things to say about the place. Where do you go from there?
Ask follow-up questions. Can you tell me more about that? Okay, it may be a one-off or it may be indicative of a problem. Portugal, anything to add?
Yeah, that's asking follow-up questions. Is there a specific scenario that the individual is speaking to, or is it their overall experience as either an applicant or as a prior employee? Is it a rumor? Like, what is it, right? So ask follow-up questions for sure.
All right. What I think we're going to do now is I think we're going to stop the recording. So if you are still with us, thank you so much for joining this evening. I am excited, all of the wonderful information that we've been able to share tonight. I hope it gives some people some reassurance that they're on the right track. Y'all are going to do a fantastic job with your interviews. And again, please find a local mentor, somebody that you can continue to bounce ideas off of, especially moving forward in the interview process. So this recording will be posted on YouTube in a short number of days. The AMSSM staff will process it and get it up there.